Hello everybody, this will be my chapter 1 analysis, finally. Before I begin, a brief recap of chapter 1 conclusions listed on the final page 153. Of all the types and the grade of maturity of the Cro-Magnon race, their applications for the domestication of animals, the coincidence of their homes being in the same places as Neolithic populations, finally the ornamental industry of this race, all of these considerations reveals to us the Cro-Magnon race as more of a detached branch in those mysterious times of the Tertiary era as a stem of the what I think is Paleogene or Paleoctona period, of which the Great Invasion happened in Europe around the start of the Neolithic period. So we established the following. The human period in Dacia, just like other parts of Europe, goes back several tens of thousands of years, at least to the first half of the Quaternary epoch. In other words, before the Abi and Agavi, of which the Iliad of Homer reminds us, before the Titans of which Hesiod speaks, there lived in Europe, and specifically Dacia, two races of people with different physical features and morals, one of the lowest grade of physical and intellectual evolution. This is the Neanderthal race, a type of people without society, without morals and rules, and whose origin we don't know. And another invasionary human race, totally distinct from the precedent, having a much more evolved physical constitution and having reached a significant semi-grade of civilization, a Faunica population whose migrations and beginnings of culture pass well beyond the Quaternary epoch times. Both of these human quaternary races were then overwhelmed, conquered, and destroyed, and perhaps in small part assimilated by the new invaders of the Neolithic period. Their moral history, and we can say natural, ends with the Quaternary era. They had no influence over the following epochs. So, he says Neanderthal and Cro-Magnon, separate things. Science teaches us Darwinism, or the evolutionary theory, that monkey turned into Neanderthal and Neanderthal turned into modern, anatomically modern man, or early humans, or Cro-Magnon. And modern science says, what about it? Now keep in mind, I am doing these analyses to understand what the man is saying better in each chapter, but also to see how science or the knowledge of the world has evolved since his time over the last 100 plus years, and if possible, to integrate information presented in our understanding of the world today. So, first, he speaks a lot about the Quaternary period. What is the Quaternary? Here we have geomaps.wr.usgs.gov. So this is an official government website. Therefore, this is the officially accepted narrative. So, what is the Quaternary? Quaternary time is the current period of geologic time which began about 1.8 million years ago. We divide time into years, months, and days, and we give these divisions names such as 1776, August, and Friday. Similarly, geologists have divided the time of Earth's long history into eons, eras, periods, and epochs of geologic time, and they have given each division a unique name. When they first started using these names, nobody knew how old the Earth was, or how many years ago the time divisions were. Instead, they based the division of time on how the fossils found in rocks changed from the oldest layers to the youngest. The Quaternary period is the name for the time in which we live. It spans the two most recent geologic epochs, the Pleistocene and the Holocene. Fossils from the Holocene epoch are like the animals living today, whereas Pleistocene fossils are much like living animals but with some differences. Many observations show that Pleistocene time was characterized by long periods of Arctic conditions that allowed ice and snow to deal with these conditions. Holocene time is the warmer epoch since the last time of widespread icy conditions. In the 20th century, following the discovery of radioactivity, geologists developed a tool to assign numeric ages to the divisions of geologic time. By observing the rate of decay of radioactive elements and then measuring the amounts of both the radioactive elements and their decay products in rocks and minerals, geologists can calculate a numeric age for certain rocks and deposits, including those with bits of charcoal for carbon dating. By careful study of the relations between the fossil-bearing sedimentary rocks and the rocks that have numeric ages, geologists have calculated the ages of the divisions of geologic time. The beginning of the Holocene was about 11,500 years ago, and the beginning of the Pleistocene was about 1.8 million years ago. Side note here to this graphic, geologists use fossils to divide geologic time. The most primitive fossils are found in the oldest rocks, the rocks of the Archean eon. Younger are the more complex but still simple fossils of the Proterozoic eon, such as Dickinsonia. The Paleozoic era marked the first complex organisms, such as the trilobites. The Mesozoic era was the time of dinosaurs. The Cenozoic era is the age of mammals, such as the Eohippus or dawn horse of the Paleogene period. By Quaternary time, the fossils are of animals that are almost but not quite like animals that are alive today, such as the mammoth and the saber-toothed cat of the Pleistocene epoch. And this is the visual they portray starting 2.5 billion years ago with Dickinsonia, which was in the Proterozoic era. Then was the trilobites, much sooner, closer to our times. Then the dinosaur, primitive horse, saber, whatever. Look, period Quaternary includes just the Holocene and the Pleistocene. However, this period is split into the Neogene and the Paleogene, and this Paleogene word is where I think Dan Sushanu may refer to this word, Paleoftona. So in other words, according to Dan Sushanu, Cro-Magnon might have been around in this time period, which modern science attributes to 65 million years ago, or after 65 million years ago, which is right after the age of the dinosaurs. So in essence, dinosaurs went extinct based on this model. Primitive horse appeared, primitive man appeared, or Cro-Magnon. Now, on this website, government website, it talks about how we are dating things. And they're talking about radioactivity. And I made that video where I asked the geochronologist a question to try to determine if multiple steps in the radiocarbon dating process can happen at the same time. I'm still waiting for an answer. I don't think I will ever have an answer, because if the answer is yes, it pretty much says our method of dating of radioactive dating is incorrect. More so, it pretty much says evolution as a theory or Darwinism is not really how things happened. More so, Deng Sushanu clearly states Cro-Magnon and Neanderthal are different branches. So then, let's continue. In chapter 1, the man speaks a lot about this man, Louis Laurent Gabriel de Mortillet. And he's the one that's referenced a lot because he's the one that introduced the Kellian, the Mousterian, Solutrean, and Magdalenian periods. In other words, Wikipedia does us justice in determining that what Deng Sushanu wrote in his book was true. And as you can see, published work, Musée Préhistorique 1881. Le Préhistorique Antique de la Home. And I believe this first one is the one that's referenced a lot in the book. In chapter 1. Let's see who this man was. Louis Laurent Gabriel de Mortillet, born in 1821, lived until 1898, was a French archaeologist and anthropologist who was born at Meilhan, Isère, so in France. He was educated at the Jesuit, look at that, the Jesuit College, whom we know clearly today were responsible for bringing education and religion to all parts of the world, specifically in the 1850s, perhaps a little bit sooner. We know the Jesuits are a continuation of the Jewish rule, which pretty well established started around 2,000 years ago with Jupiter. The rule of Jupiter after Titanomachia and the overthrow of Saturn. Does that mean Saturn totally disappeared then? Not necessarily, but the point is, Jupiter did not want man to succeed. He wanted to exterminate man. We'll cover that later. But the point is, if Mortillet got his education at a Jesuit college, does that mean that his perception of reality was a Jesuit perception? Who knows? What's more interesting is that Deng Sushanu used him as a reference. Does that mean that Deng Sushanu had himself a Jesuit perception of reality? Or was he just using the available science at the time? And through reading chapter 1, I'm under the impression he was just using the available knowledge, scientific knowledge at the time, because he posed that so important question of how are we determining the true age of every epoch, whether by a long process or a very rapid process. So in other words, modern science since the 1800s has accepted that everything has occurred over millions of years. But by posing the question, as Deng Sushanu posed, that what if it happened over a very short period of time? Well, he's just thinking outside the box, right? And I'm actually thinking outside the box as well. I am really questioning the true age of everything. Anyways. So he was educated at the Jesuit College of Chambéry, which is in France, and the Paris Conservatoire, also France. Becoming in 1847 proprietor of La Revue Indépendante. It sounds like a newspaper or some sort of article. He was implicated in the revolution of 1848. So perhaps he too was different. Well, okay. Let's look at his picture. I see the massive forehead here, and I see the wig style balding pattern, which is not really balding, it's just where the hairline is. The way I see it, this guy followed the Jesuit agenda. He did. He really did. I'll cover this more at the end of the video. It's important to understand what I mean by cranial features because I have a better understanding now. So he spent 2 years imprisoned, he fled the country, then he lived in Italy for the next 15 years. He studied see, in 1864 he returned to Paris and afterwards was appointed curator of the museum at Saint-Germain. He became mayor of the town and in 1885 he was elected deputy for Sans-et-Oise. So clearly, if he had any resistance to the system in his early days when he was sent to prison, he was part of the system later on when he became an official. Because, how do we know this? Because his official storyline is still accepted to this day. He is best known for his clarification and ordering of the archaeology of the Paleolithic, where Edouard Lartet, look at his head, clearly big forehead, wig style balding pattern. He had used fauna as a distinguishing feature, mammoth against reindeer. This word is important, reindeer. Why? Because in chapter 1 I speak about the cervus terund, which I thought meant stag. Now I'm actually pretty sure cervus cervulterund means reindeer, not stag. So it was the reindeer epoch or era or whatever you want to call it. Which also implies snow, a lot of snow and ice. For his important discoveries, Mortillet realized that as fauna varied with latitude, they were unreliable indicators and proposed instead a classification by means of dwelling places, alluvial or cave epochs, for example. Later, acknowledging the ambiguity in that system as well, he published a new classification in 1869 using type sites and their associated artifacts to distinguish and name periods Kellian, Mousterian, Solutrean, Magdalenian, Robenhausen. His system may have subsequently been refined but still remains in current use. However, whereas Mortillet believed his classifications were universal stages with an unilineal evolution, probably like Darwinism. Later thinking regards each culture as a more localized conglomerate. Oh, so later he thought different. Capable of overlapping in time with others, not necessarily linearly related. Mortillet proposed the name Marnian epoch as a replacement for the period usually called the Gallic, which extends from about 5 centuries before the Christian era to the conquest of Gaul by Caesar. Mortillet generally objected to the term Gallic, as the civilization characteristic of the epoch was not peculiar to the ancient Gauls, but was common to nearly all Europe at the same date. The name is derived from the French department of Marne. Stone Age art. The Mortillet recognized the importance of the mobiliary art discovered by Lartet and Christie, commenting of such bone carvings. They are not the work of children, they are the childhood of art. However, he was unable to accept the authenticity of the much more extensive cave art that was coming to light, conservatively and stiffly rejecting Sautuolas, Discovery of the paintings in Altamira is the original work of Paleolithic man. So, I don't want to repeat the Kellian, Mousterian, Solutrean, and Magdalenian epochs. I'll have to go with what Densuchanu said. If you want to research that, go for it. I just want to establish that these things existed. They're still generally accepted today. And Densuchanu did an amazing job referencing them in the early years of archaeology and paleontology and anything of that nature. So, Chapter 1 speaks a lot about the Neanderthal man and the Cro-Magnon man. Now here's what's interesting. Neanderthals are an extinct species or subspecies of archaic humans in the genus Homo who live within Eurasia from circa 400,000 until 40,000 years ago. Now Densuchanu says they lived throughout the entire period of the Quaternary epoch. So, off the bat, I'm getting the impression that we have a manufactured history of Cro-Magnon in the last 100 years or so. Now, if you believe in the evolutionary theory, the Darwinism, well, take a look at this picture. First of all, it says anatomical comparison of skulls of Homo sapiens left and Homo neanderthalensis right in Cleveland Museum of Natural History. So left is Homo sapiens, right is Cro-Magnon. Looking at the brain case, this is us, and this is Cro-Magnon. Whatever he said about Neanderthal, did they not have a bigger brain than we do? Did they not have a bigger brain than we do? I mean, just look at this bad boy. It's clearly bigger, right? Or more dolichocephaly, right? And this is Neanderthal we're talking about here. Assuming this is a Neanderthal skull and not something else. Anyways, evolution. It says both Neanderthals and anatomically modern humans were initially thought to have evolved from Homo erectus between 300 and 200,000 years ago. Homo erectus had emerged around 1.8 million years ago and had long been present in various subspecies throughout Eurasia. Now, the divergence between Neanderthal and Homo sapiens lineages is estimated between 800 and 400,000 years ago. Okay, so this sentence right here is telling us that Cro-Magnon started to appear somewhere between 800 and 400,000 years ago. But if that's the case, how did Neanderthal man and Cro-Magnon live side by side for all these years, and then all of a sudden they both became extinct? I'll get back to that later. Habitat and range, approximate Neanderthal range, pre-Neanderthal and early Neanderthal. Range shown in purple, late Neanderthal range in blue. So this map is deceiving because if you look at maps prior to the 1500s, when the globe model for the Earth was accepted, all the maps of the world show Europe, North Africa, and Minor Asia as the only land. Sites where classic Neanderthal fossils were found. Ice sheets of the last glacial maximum are indicated, partly ice-free during the Eemian interglacial. So if you're looking at this map, and you understand this is the Black Sea, wow, it looks so different even here. So this would be like Greece, this would be like Italy, this would be like the Black Sea. Through here would be the Danube, and these right here would be the Carpathian Mountains. And what the heck is this? It looks like the modern Caspian Sea. And here it looks like a lot more water. And this is all ice. And this is ice. So clearly the way the Earth looks, the surface layer, changed a lot over time. And Moldova, is that like Moldova next to Romania? Ne- Wait, sites of unlivered the fossils. Oh, okay, so this is where all the Neanderthal remains were found. So clearly, Europe, Minor Asia, and North Africa. What else we got here? Yeah, Neanderthal says that. I mean, Decianus says Neanderthal was the dumbest and the weakest, and they had no knowledge of using any sort of tools other than a random rock here and there. So it sounds like their thinking pattern was not very evolved, but at the same time, how do they have brains bigger than ours? So clearly, brain size is not the only thing that matters. It's actually more of the genes activated within one's DNA. Remember this, because at the conclusion of the video I will be speaking about that. Culture. Whether Neanderthals created art and used adornments which would indicate a capability for complex symbolic thought remains unresolved. I'll stop right there. We are pretty much told everything that follows is speculation. Interbreeding with archaic and modern humans. An alternative to extinction is the Neanderthal were absorbed into the Cro-Magnon population by interbreeding. Okay, let's think about this for a minute. In the chapter 1, Neanderthal is portrayed as a dumb, wild animal. Cro-Magnon is portrayed as a physically evolved, intellectually evolved, semi-civilized person. So the question here becomes, Cro-Magnon, would they want to mate with a wild beast? And the answer to that is two-sided. The one side is, if they were morally good and resonated with the frequencies of peace or love, they would have no such sinister thoughts as having sex with animals. On the other hand, if their way of thinking was corrupt or perverse, as is occurrent in many people today, then perhaps they will not have an issue mating with animals. So I'm leaning more towards the first option. I don't think they wanted to have sex with animals, but who knows? Who knows? More so, keep in mind, they both became extinct according to the book. According to science, they both became us. So, big question marks here. Extinction. According to a 2014 study by Thomas Higham and colleagues of organic samples from European sites, Neanderthals died out in Europe between 41 and 39,000 years ago. New dating in Iberia, where Neanderthal dates as late as 24,000 years, had been reported before now suggests evidence of Neanderthal survival in the peninsula after 42,000 years ago is almost non-existent. Peninsula? Iberia, Spain. Iberia, Spain. So, anatomically, modern humans arrived in Mediterranean Europe between 45 and 43,000 years ago, so the two different human populations shared Europe for several thousand years. The exact nature of biological and cultural interaction between Neanderthals and other human groups is contested. Possible scenarios for the extinction are: 1. Neanderthals were a separate species from modern humans and became extinct because of climate change or interaction with modern humans, and were replaced by modern humans moving into their habitat between 45 and 40,000 years ago. Jared Diamond has suggested a scenario of violent conflict and displacement. The second option is Neanderthals were a contemporary subspecies that bred with modern humans and disappeared through absorption, interbreeding theory. 3. Volcanic catastrophe. See Companion Ignimbrite eruption. Yeah, maybe just. Anyways, the point is this. Earlier on in this article, it said that Cro-Magnon separated from Neanderthal, who were both descended from the Denisovans from 800 to 400,000 years ago. But only for a few thousand years they were coexisting in specific areas, and eventually they decided to mate. Okay, but what about for all those 300 or 400,000 years or longer? What were they doing then? Peacefully coexisting? Something's not right with this explanation. So then, let's look at Cro-Magnon now. He says European early modern humans, Cro-Magnon redirects here. Thanks a lot, Wikipedia. European early modern humans. In the context of the Upper Paleolithic in Europe, so Upper Paleolithic is 1.4 million years ago to about 10,000 years ago. Refers to the early presence of anatomically modern humans in Europe. So Neanderthal clearly is not considered anatomically modern. The term early modern is usually taken to include fossils of the several locations, including Solutrean and Magdalenian. So clearly, it solidifies what Dan Susano was saying even more, extending through the last glacial maximum, covering the period of roughly 48 to 15,000 years ago. The early presence from 45,000 years ago is informed by the dating of the Grota del Cavallo fossil in 2011. Earlier literature also cites 40,000 to 35,000 years ago. So this is Italy. The upper limit of 15,000 marks the transition to the European Mesolithic, depending on the region, also given in the range of 12 to 10,000 years ago. Use of Cro-Magnon is mostly to times after the beginning of the Aurignacian proper, which is 35 to 35,000 years ago. Genetically, EMH, or European early modern humans, form an isolated population between 37 and 14,000 years ago, with significant Mesolithic admixture from the Near East and Caucasus beginning around 14,000 years ago. The description as modern is used as contrasting with the archaic Neanderthals who lived within Europe from 400,000 to 37,000 years ago. So wait a minute. We're saying 800,000 about Neanderthal just a minute ago. Now you narrowed it down to a certainty of 400,000? Come on. The term EMH is equivalent to Cro-Magnon man or Cro-Magnons, a term derived from the Cro-Magnon rock shelter in southwestern France, where the first EMH were found in 1868. Blah blah blah. The earliest known remains of EMH can be dated to before 40,000 years ago. With some certainty, those from Grotta del Cavallo in Italy and from some cavern in England, 45 to 41,000 years ago. But in the other article about Neanderthal, it said that the branches of Neanderthal and Cro-Magnon split about 400 to 800,000 years ago. So what is this 40,000 years ago nonsense? Doesn't make sense. So clearly, all of Europe, Minor Asia, and part of North Africa. One more thing to show that Densușanu is not just all about being Romanian and patriotic in that sense. Look at all the locations where fossils were found. Italy, Germany, Russia, or Eastern Europe. North Eurasian. Romania, Peștera cu Oase, which translates to the cave of bones. They can't even do a proper translation. Anyways, it appears next to Cave Bear Den. I'll talk about that in a minute. UK, Russia, UK, France, Czech Republic, Romania, France, Czech Republic, Italy, Portugal, France, Switzerland, Italy. Oh look, associated with the Solutrian. So, to conclude what we've understood so far, Densușanu speaks of Neanderthal and Cro-Magnon living at the same time. Science says that Cro-Magnon followed Neanderthal, and Cro-Magnon became us about 15,000 to 10,000 years ago or so. While Densușanu says both were wiped out, extinct, or assimilated genetic-wise into modern populations. So at this point, I'm really starting to question this genetics thing, because we have two distinct populations. We have the satyr, which I mentioned, we have the vampire-like, which I mentioned, and they all came extinct. Now in chapter 2, which is titled The Neolithic Invasion, it is spoken about a migration from the Altai Mountains into Europe through the Carpathians. Now, what's interesting about that statement is, where was it? First of all, like most early humans, the Cro-Magnons were primarily became hunters, killing mammoths, cave bears, horses, and reindeer. They hunted with spears, javelins, and spear throwers. Archery had not yet been invented. We know archery becomes very big with the Pelagians. But what's interesting about this statement is that it suggests that they were doing many of the same things that Neanderthal were doing. It's like, wait a minute. How could they possibly be doing the same thing if one is on the upper end of evolution and one is on the lower end of evolution? It makes no sense. There was a section here where it mentioned migration. Oh, I'll just do that now if I can find it. The Altai Mountains. Just so you know, they are a mountain range in Central and East Asia where Russia, China, Mongolia, and Kazakhstan come together, and where the Irtysh and Ob have their headwaters. This, if you continue to read, leads into this. The semi-turbino phenomenon refers to a pattern of burial sites with similar bronze artifacts dated from 21 to 1900 BCE found across northern Eurasia, from Finland to Mongolia, which has suggested a common point of cultural origin, advanced metalworking technology, and unexplained rapid migration. The buried were nomadic warriors and metalworkers traveling on horseback or two-wheeled chariots. The name derives from the Seyma cemetery at the confluence of the Oka River and Volga River, first excavated around 1914, and the Turbino Cemetery in Perm, first excavated in 1924. Now, Deng Shanun died in 1911. He has a whole chapter titled The Neolithic Invasion, stating that people from the Altai Mountains went into Europe prior to the Seyma Turbino phenomenon being spoken about, prior to this excavations. How the heck did he know? Now, again, the point to make out here is a common point of cultural origin and unexplained rapid migration. The bronze and semi-turbino weapons is identified as containing tin and based on bronze originating from ore from the Altai Mountains region. Semi-turbino type bronzes have been discovered as far west as the Borodino treasure in Moldavia, which is Romania. Moldavia is just Romania. It's just politics in the way. The bronzes were technologically advanced for the time, including lost wax casting, which is how the emerald tablets of Thoth were written, which later you will understand relates to Hermes. I'll get into that. And it's also a method of writing that was utilized. So they would pour wax on brass plates and then write the messages. This is how the emerald tablets were written, except they're special. So the Altai mountain in what is now southern Russia and central Mongolia have been identified as the point of origin of the cultural enigma Seyma-Turbino phenomenon. The culture spread from this mountain to the west and to the east. Artifacts types such as spearheads with hooks, single-bladed knives, and socketed axes with geometric designs travel west and east. So, to 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 make sure I'm understood with what I'm saying here. According to Deng Sushanu, everything became extinct in Europe around the same time, around the start of the Neolithic time period, which, okay, let's make sure we understand Neolithic. $12,000 years ago. It started about 12,000 years ago. According to Deng Sushanu, the whole history he's portraying is about 8,000 years old, and he attributes this history to some group from Spain, which were proudly saying that their writing is 6,000 years old when he wrote the book. So, this Wikipedia link is saying this happened about 4,000 years ago? Who knows? Question of time is question of manufactured time is still existent in my mind as well. So the culture spread from these mountains to the west and to the east. Now, just to make sure we clearly understand this, even to this day, it looks like icy terrain, snow, possibly glaciers. Look at this. What happened here? So the logic is that from this area, migration occurred. Now keep in mind, this is according to Deng Sushan. But from that area, somehow migration occurred to this area because they came through the Carpathian Mountains. Now, based on what we see on the globe today, it doesn't make sense because it just shows plains here. But what if it was just one stretch of mountains? And to understand this, we have to understand the word orogeny, which is mentioned by Deng Susciano, and then when he mentions Romanian folklore, where it talks about the mountain heads still clashing. Now, if we're trying to find a mountain range that depicts a migration from the Altai Mountains to the Carpathian Mountains, where'd you go? Then what we can attempt to do is look at what is a plain today and an ocean and whatever water body, and a continuation of this mountain chain. Perhaps in the past it was all connected. So perhaps these Altai mountains went all the way through here, went through here. Let's see, where else? Perhaps there was a mountain range that went this way, which led to this mountain range. And naturally, the Carpathians separate Europe from the rest of the world. So maybe it was one long chain of mountains. Maybe the migration was more. Perhaps these Altai mountains in the past were right next to the Carpathian Mountains, and somehow the shifts of the earth caused extra land in between over time. Let's call it tectonics. Plate tectonics. So how it happened, I don't know. There are possibilities, but clearly in the book it stated that from these Altai mountains the Neolithic invasion occurred in Europe. So why would they? Wow, look at these plates. I think the yellow lines represents tectonic plates. So perhaps the plate was like this? Or is that country boundaries? Anyways, if this is the Altai Mountains, why would they go here? Why would they not go here or this area? Or did they really go everywhere? Who knows? When I translate chapter 2, maybe it will make more sense. But the point I was trying to make is that this migration that, oh, you know what? Maybe there was more ice. But how would they survive such a long trip? Unless they already had knowledge, advanced genetic knowledge. Look at this metallurgy, this bronze figurine. Would you expect someone to do this about 8,000 years ago? Or as science says, 4,000 years ago? I don't know. It looks pretty well done to me. How about these? Look at that. That looks like emerald, right? I'll get back to that. I also want to mention the animals that Dengsu Xiaolu spoke of. The Panthera spelaea, or the cave lion. This is it. It existed. Became extinct about 13,000 years ago. The cave bear became extinct about 24,000 years ago. And this clearly, they say, Carpathian Mountains. They lived in the Carpathians. The Panthera, they lived in Europe to Alaska over the Bering, blah blah. Iberian Peninsula, Southeast Europe, Great Britain, Central Europe, and East European Plain. Clearly, they lived in the area that Dengsu Xiaolu spoke of. And then we have the Megaloceros. I think he said Cervus Megaloceros was the one he referred to. And I think he said they even lived up to the 1300s in Ireland. They were known as the Irish elk, the giant elk. According to this, most members of the genus were extremely large animals that favored meadows and open woodlands. They are the most cursorial deer known, specifically adapted to run. Interesting. When did Joe go extinct? Actually, they didn't go. Let's see. Temporal range, Pleistocene to about 2.5 to about 11,700 years ago, and it all relates to glaciers. So clearly the world was very different. The point I was trying to make with all these animals, including the mammoth. Some say he went extinct 4,000 years ago, perhaps he did, but the point is, Cro-Magnon, Neanderthal, and all these animals lived in the time period that Dengsu Xiaolu spoke about, which is the Quaternary period, which ended about 11,000, 12,000 years ago. Everything that came afterwards was something new. That's the point I'm trying to get across. And if there was a Neolithic invasion where the people that became the Pelagians went into Europe with the starting point as the Carpathian Mountains, where they first settled and from there moved outwards, then that is the origins of Homo sapiens humanity. Now you have to understand, these invaders, Neolithic invaders, were not modern Homo sapiens. Their heads, their heads were dolichocephaly. Dolichocephaly. They were long-headed, a condition where the head is longer than would be expected relative to its width. And if we look at images, it's literally elongated heads. See normal, and then so even to this day there are people that have elongated heads. It's considered a medical thing. In Egyptian times it was a normal thing. Look at that. See that? Huh. Uh, the Peruvian skulls look like this. Brian Forster talks about it, and he did some genetic testing of some skull material which dated it, well, that area between the Altai Mountains and the Carpathian Mountains. And again, Egyptian cultures talked about this. Dengsu Xiangnu says that the Cro-Magnons had these skulls. In the picture I showed you of Neanderthal showed you that even the Neanderthal skull was bigger than ours. So it's important to understand this because it's also portrayed in Pelagian skulls. Like for example, the Dacian hat. It literally looked like this. Now you would think to yourself, why would there be such a overt? As one guy said in one of the videos I watched, they were like a Smurf's hat. So why would they have this type of hat? It doesn't make sense unless their heads were bigger or their heads continue to grow throughout their lifetimes. In other words, the genetics responsible for head growth, whether it's skull size or brain size, is turned off in us at a certain point in our evolution throughout our lifetimes, but in them it seems to not have been turned off. And we can also see a Jedi hat. Same thing. Look at this one. See? Conical almost. Conical. And the Jedi were later known as the Dacians, and then even later known as the Goths, and what became the Visigoths, the Ostrogoths, and other Goths, and the Getuli in Africa, and the Phrygians in Minor Asia. See? Same thing. Conical. It suggests their brains continue. Look at this one. Heck, even this mannequin has a massive head. So the point is that the Egyptian elongated heads is spoken about as by Nikolai Dengsu Xiangnu, where he uses the word dolichocephaly. And these seem to be the people that migrated from the Altai Mountains to the Carpathian Mountains. Now clearly, just looking at these head sizes, we can tell they are not Homo sapiens sapiens. They are not us. But they are the Pelagians. So in other words, when the Pelagian Empire was erased from history, they weren't really erased in terms of genocide, because naturally people who have Latin blood in them, with the greatest proportions today being the Romanians and the Moldavians, our descendants from them. So what we're talking about here is something occurred where our brains stopped growing. We went from genetics on for continuous brain growth throughout one's lifetime to genes off for our brain size stops at a certain point. We are talking about genetic engineering. And this is where it gets very complicated. Now, before I go on to that, we must understand some of the things that Deng Xiaoping spoke about in terms of their technology. He mentioned that a specific group, according to Caesar Boliak, had something known as red copper. Now, when I looked at the red copper age in Google, it refers me to the Copper Age. Now, scrolling down, I think it was this article. Oh no, it's not this one. Oh, I remember now. The point I was trying to make is that there is no mention of red copper. He also mentioned Petroflint X. I remember now. What is a Petroflint X? I used the link. Was it this one? Okay, I'll just do this the whole way. I'm sorry. Thought I could remember. Apparently. Oh wait, Neolithic greenstone axe plates? Perhaps that's the one. Uh, let's just do this. Because this is important. Is brass magnetic? When we mix zinc and copper to form the alloy brass, we also end up with a non-magnetic compound. So brass is not magnetic. Like aluminum, copper, and zinc, brass does interact with moving magnets. In the video below, a brass plate on a pendulum will move rapidly in the absence of a magnet. Something about petroflint told me that there's an electromagnetic property. Red brass? If I remember that, I'll get back to it. For now, let me continue. Orogeny. An orogeny is an event. Now keep in mind this is important because I mentioned the migration pattern from the Altai Mountains to the Carpathian Mountains, and it's related to this term which Deng Xiaono used in his book. An orogeny is an event that leads to both structural deformation and compositional differentiation of the Earth's lithosphere, crust and uppermost mantle, at convergent plate margins. An orogen or orogenic belt develops when a continental plate crumples and is pushed upwards to form one or more mountain ranges. This involves a series of geological processes collectively called orogenesis. So, it's the mechanism by which mountains are built. Keep in mind, in Romanian folklore, there are stories of when the mountains used to butt heads or clash heads. So, how would they have folklore about that? Well, let's find out how long does it take for this process to happen? Where was it? Where was it? Doo, 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 doo. See, orogeny involves plate tectonics, magmatism, metamorphism, and mineralization. What happens in specific origin depends upon the strength and rheology, or the flow of matter in a liquid state. Interesting. Soft solids of the continental lithosphere and how these properties change during orogenesis. Interesting. Where the heck were you? So we know today, whenever an earthquake occurs, this could happen, which is instant, right? Seconds to maybe a minute. But in here it says that this orogenesis happened over a very long time. Okay, the process of orogeny can take tens of millions of years and build mountains from plains or from the seabed. That's what I was trying to point out. Really? How do you know it happens in such a long... My question here is, could this potentially happen instantly, in a matter of seconds, or minutes, or hours, or days? Because if it can happen in such a short time span, then it's very possible 12,000 or however many years ago, when every species became extinct in Europe, that such an event occurred rapidly, which would explain the Altai Mountains separating from the Carpathian Mountains and the space in between becoming like an ocean, which we later recognized based on old maps, the Pomponius Mela, as Kazakhstan being an ocean. So I'm getting closer, I believe. Further study of this is required. I recommend you study it also. point I was trying to make is that something about this process of red copper, some statement said something about electromagnetic properties, which I found very interesting. I hope I can remember. Anyways, so here we have, to conclude what we've learned so far, there was Cro-Magnon, there was Neanderthal, there was the Satyr, there was the Piloshi or the hairy vampire people, there was this big animals which were mostly hairy because it was mostly a glacial time, an ice age, if you will, with a lot of ice everywhere. So fur was or hair was necessary for animals and people alike to survive. And then it all changed. But even the origins of these species that existed back then are a big question mark because we've seen Neanderthal had a bigger skull than we did. Then Sushana refers to Cro-Magnon as having dolichocephalic heads. And this people that came from the Altai Mountains also are referred as having dolichocephalic heads. So, if you're looking at all the details, if you're looking at the Greek mythology, Roman mythology, and now Pelagian mythology, as well as all the mythologies and folklore from all around the world, it speaks about animal and human hybrids. In fact, we've already begun this process today with combining animals such as a lion with a tiger, becomes a liger. A tiger with a lion becomes a tigon. It all depends on who's the mother, who's the father. So we're talking about genetics here. And a lot of mythology refers to human/animal combinations or manipulation of genetics. Our brain size going from elongated to modern speaks about genetics. So let's analyze real quick some of these genetic combinations from the past. Upper body of a human with the lower body of a horse is an Angitai. A centaur, upper body of a human, lower body of a horse. Onocentaur, upper body of a human with the lower body of a donkey. The Ipotane, a human with the hindquarters of a horse. A satyr, see? Originally an ancient Greek nature spirit with the body of a man, but the long tail and pointed ears of a horse. From the beginning, satyrs were inextricably associated with drunkenness and ribaldry, known for their love of wine, music, and women. By the Hellenistic period, satyrs gradually began to be depicted as men with the horns and legs of goats, likely due to conflation with Pan. They were eventually conflated with the Roman fauns, and since roughly the 2nd century AD, they have been indistinguishable from each other. Silenos, virtually identical to satyrs, sometimes depicted as more elderly. Human-goat hybrids, the faun, and so on. Human-bird hybrids, harpy, lilitu. You can research all these yourselves, but clearly there are many depictions of human-animal hybrids from all cultures. This is Russian, this is Greek. Mermaids appear in folklore of many cultures worldwide, including the Near East, Europe, Asia, Africa. Triton, Greek, Jengu are the Sawa ethnic groups of the Cameroon. Matsya, Hindu. Sirena, Filipino. Siokoi, Philippine. Let's see, this one is funny. The Shedu. A Yamasoi is an Assyrian protective deity. So clearly this is not a god. When we look at Sumerian depictions, these are not the gods. These are the hybrids created by the Sumerians. The Sumerians are Pelagians, elongated heads. So this is a hybrid. Humans with animal head. Ganesha, very big in Hinduism. Baphomet, goat's head, human body. But as I've shown previously, the feet are that of a goat. So it's more of a satyr, but it also has, point being, it's a genetic engineering manipulation. All of these are. Cernunnos, Celtic, horned god, which goes back to the reindeer. So perhaps, oh, look at that, ancient Gaulish Celtic god with a head of a stag. Oh, so what I refer to as stag. So a stag is a reindeer. Ha! I did not know that. Humans with added animal parts. Angel. Winged genie. A seraph. Multiple wings. Mothman. Fairy. It's all genetic engineering, bro. All of it. Heifer was horned. Cow horns? Interesting. Bot also. Part animal, part human, transitioning or shape-shifting, werewolf, werecat, selkie, seals, huh? Quadrupeds, 2 kinds of animal parts, 3 kinds of animal parts, 4 kinds of animal. You see, modern. This were all being done in a laboratory somewhere. This Nureola or Sawaki, or wait, as depicted by Sawaki. This hybrid Titans were probably hybrids too. So all of these hybrids imply advanced genetic knowledge. What does that mean? It means that when all the things became extinct prior to the Neolithic age, the new Neolithic beings were also genetically manipulated. So we have to question how far back we have to go to get to the natural order of things before the genetic manipulation started. Genetic manipulation that continues to today. And I have prepared for you guys genetic manipulation of today. Just so you understand, some people, so initially started with me referring to it as Homo capensis based on what some lady said. Then it became dolichocephalic or elongated heads or conical. And now I can present in a way that makes sense. If Sophie allows me to. This is now looking good. Oh, did I just happen to find the brass ring? Dun 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 dun. So after the copper came to So after the Copper Age was the Bronze Age, followed by the Iron Age. There was no Brass Age because for many years it was not easy to make brass. Before the 18th century, zinc metal could not be made since it melts at 420 Celsius and boils at about 950 Celsius. So this is where this is why it stood out to me, this Red Copper Age. Also, the word arama in Romanian, which translates to either brass or copper. I thought it was important to leave both because of this one simple statement, 420 degrees. So in other words, this rewrites history if there was a brass age. Also, look at that. Pre-dynastic Egyptians knew copper very well in hieroglyphic. Copper was represented by the Ankh symbol. And as I've said before, and as I will say in the future many times, the Egyptians were also Pelagian descendants, or the Neolithic invaders of Europe. Tin was known as the Greeks knew brass as ore kalkos, as brilliant and white copper. Roman writers referred to it as auriculum, used for the production of sesterces coins. Romans liked it for the production of golden colored helmets. They used grades from. How did they know this? This is extremely advanced metallurgy. Well, of course they knew. They knew since the Pelagian times, this knowledge was known. Okay, oh, I think I found it. They made batteries. Because of its ease of manufacture, machining, and corrosion resistance. See? Proof right here. They had machining knowledge. Even though they say this didn't exist till much later. Brass became the standard alloy from which were made all accurate instruments such as clocks, watches, and navigational aids. The invention by Harrison of the chronometer in 1761 depended on the use of brass for the manufacture of an accurate timekeeper. I remember reading somewhere that it's electromagnetic as well, but as you can see, it is important. to know that it was not a copper age, it was a brass age from the beginning. Um, I apologize, I'm dragging on here. I'm aware of this. Let's start with this guy. What do you notice about him? How about this guy? What do you notice about him? Would you say this man is balding? Or would you say this man has a massive forehead and the hairline is just over there? And if his hair grew out a little bit longer, it would be like the Whig Party people from the 1800s. See this guy? His forehead much lower. And this guy? How about this guy? Look at this picture. See his forehead versus his forehead? Massive, right? Genetics are different. That's what I'm trying to point out. These people with the larger heads are genetically engineered. In other words, their bloodlines. Their bloodlines a lot. In essence, the genes responsible for continuation of brain and skull size growth is still on even into adulthood. Not like for us. So for those super elongated skulls to exist, it implies those people were very old. Very, very old. So if we had these genes active in us today, well, there's a very good example of how we would look. When I was younger, I used to love a show with the individual named Frankie Muniz. So clearly you can see his head is already, his forehead is huge. His hairline is way up there, right? Kind of like the Whig Party. Okay, he's younger there. Malcolm in the Middle, that's the show I used to watch. Okay, how about him in 2019? Can you see his forehead now? His hairline is becoming even more. So they hide these things very well on TV, whether it's congressmen or news anchors or actors, actresses, whatever. They hide it very well through the hairstyle. But once you get to a certain age, you can no longer hide it. And it's starting to become very apparent here. You can tell based on the comparison with his companion, Paige Price, that his head is not regularly proportioned. Oh, here, brilliant picture. See, when he's younger, it's not so big. When he gets older, way bigger. So his head, his his cranium continues to grow, his skull continues to grow over the span of his lifetime until he gets to be like this. Like Vern Buchanan, like I just showed you. Come on. Or, what's his name? I used to look up to this man a lot. I thank him for putting me on the right path. I insult him for disinfo agent. Being a disinfo agent. Remember the wig hairstyle? See? The balding. So it's not balding in the head, in the front of the head. It's just the skull continues to grow. The hair. So if he lives another 100 years, his head would be way bigger. Look at all these other guys, see? It's not a balding pattern. It's a hairline based on the genetics. And people that look like this, with the massive foreheads, they are who rule our world. They are the rulers in plain sight. See this guy? Same thing. They are everywhere. All you have to do is turn on your TV and you will spot them everywhere. This guy, he's gonna look like this too when he's older. Who is this? Some young guy. But the best example still for me is David Wilcock. See how big it is? When he's another 20, 30 years older, his head will be even bigger. The genes responsible for growth. See? Perfect example. This is him younger, and this is him older. It's grown significantly. His skull has grown significantly since he was young. So the genes responsible for brain growth and skull growth in the elite, the people that run our world, is still active, and the rest of us has been turned off. In him, still active. So the genetic technology that was known to the Pelagians fell into the wrong hands, and it's been used to control us ever since. But a few privileged individuals still have the genes turned on. This may be related to selling your soul. You sell your soul, so the genetic material responsible for head growth is still active. See, same balding pattern. With him it's harder to tell because of his hairstyle, but clearly, see that? That's not normal. That is not normal. Who else did I have saved up? Let's see. I don't think you'll ever watch again TV or anything on TV. Any celebrity, once you start to see these differences everywhere, you realize, holy crap, there's a dual reality, a dual civilization. There is us regular folks, and then there is them. What did I say up here? Oh, okay. See her forehead? So it's not just males, it's not just white males, it's whomever belongs to their system. See that? I remember something else now. So the Senate members, look at him. Look at him. Let's see. Who in this picture? Oh, big head. Big head. I mean, just look at this guy. Holy craps. Slap some horns on him, huh? See, this is normal. This is not normal. This is not normal. This, hard to say. That looks relatively normal. Not normal. Who else we got? Relatively normal. Can't tell. Not normal. Not normal. Not normal. Not normal. So it seems based on the head size, there's also a hierarchy within them. Definitely not normal. Hard to say. Hard to say with women because of hair. Not normal. Normal. Can't tell with this guy. Point I'm trying to make is they're everywhere. And as a final example of this, look at this guy. You know who this guy is. Not normal. So their genetic state, brain growth, should continue. Look at this guy. Oof. So for some, it's just a little bit more. For others, it's far more advanced, like that Vern Buchanan guy I talked about. Look at this guy. Holy crap, look at this guy. So yeah, I could literally waste all day showing you examples of these people among us, but they are literally the rulers of society. So yeah, I think that pretty much covers chapter 1. There was a massive extinction, which I'm starting to believe it was done on purpose. Perhaps it was a selection process to determine which of the human species would be the ones they wanted to maintain. And then they created the Neolithic species, which may have gone only to Europe, may have gone to other places. If they had gone to other places, though, they would still, I don't know, further thought on that. To transition into chapter 2, I just want to clearly state that genetic manipulation was part of human Homo sapiens construction from the very beginning. It continued throughout the Pelagian reign. As I mentioned in the last video, it seems there was a battle of good versus evil. Perhaps we did this all to ourselves. Perhaps our long lost ancestors started this cycle. Perhaps they created the technology, the AI that started this cycle. Perhaps at some point during Pelagian times there was an outside invasion from somewhere else. Further analysis required. But to put a cap on chapter 1, everything that was then ended prior to the Neolithic, and what came in the Neolithic were genetic deviations of what was before, which to me was genetic manipulation, which is seen through Greek, Roman, and the worldwide mythology of the hybrids, which is seen in modern day through our absence of an elongated skull, and this privilege given to specific bloodlines, those that we associate with selling their souls to the devil. And that's chapter 1 analysis.